So before I review what Mr. LaRouche had to say about Obama's State of the Union address, which people may have heard, I'd like people to just remember what happened at these various summits, like the APEC summit, the Brisbane summit, that is what's been on the table from the BRICS, particularly from the Chinese to the United States, is an invitation for the United States to give up its program of being with the British Empire and the bailouts and World War III and join with this phenomenal Hamiltonian policy of the BRICS countries. So remembering that, then think about Obama's State of the Union. How many people here saw his State of the Union address?
Okay. It killed me, but I turned it on.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to watch it, and then when I didn't watch it, and then when I heard what LaRouche had to say about it, I said, well, I better at least watch 2 minutes. And it was actually worse than I even could have imagined. I mean, it was really bad. So what LaRouche said about it was that Obama's State of the Union address was clinically insane, filled with the most corrupt, rotten, foolish, idiotic statements. And what was worse, and this is what many people I spoke with who saw it also felt, is that the audience was cheering him on like a pack of idiots.
Not Lee either. Lee, what's his name from Vermont? He would just sort of sit there.
Bernie Sanders or Leahy?
No, Leahy.
Leahy, yeah. No, and LaRouche said it was an echo of the Nuremberg rallies of Nazi Germany. And he said in a discussion with the policy committee that Hitler would have actually been embarrassed to give such a stupid speech. And I mean, the way it begins is Obama gets up and says, yesterday, a woman ate breakfast, and then he blinks, and basically says that were it not for him, she wouldn't have been able to have breakfast. I mean, and it was a series of things like that.
He had that gal who wrote the letter to him.
Yeah, I mean, it was just,
no, she was
but so there was all this insanity about the non-existent alleged prosperity that Americans have been experiencing because he's there. But then there were certain things that were really crucial. For example, he said that we are in the middle of building, quote, the most competitive economy anywhere. Then he launched into a demand for fast track on all these horrible free trade agreements. And then he said, as we speak, China wants to write the rules for the world's fastest growing region. And why would we let that happen? I mean, why would we allow the Chinese to determine their own economy in the part of the world where they're the largest nation? I mean, it's unbelievable. And then he says, we will continue to hunt down terrorists and dismantle their networks, which I was thinking, you might as well have said we will continue to hunt down terrorists and dismember them. But anyway, and dismantle their networks, and we reserve the right to act unilaterally as we have done relentlessly since I took office, to take out terrorists who pose a direct threat to us and our allies. And you think about his alliance with the Saudis, who funded and orchestrated 9/11 and continue to be the main funder of terrorism today. Then he said,
Syria.
We're upholding the principle that bigger nations can't bully the small. We would never bully, of course. And we have opposed the Russian aggression, and we are supporting the democracy in Ukraine.
Oh boy.
And then he says, today it is America that stands strong and united with our allies. What is our allies are Saudi Arabia and Qatar. I mean, that's about it. And Great Britain, yeah. So we're standing strong with these wonderful allies that we have. The Saudis, by the way, have beheaded 13 people this year already, just as a government policy, and I don't know how many people they've... That's right, they're flogging this guy till he's dead practically, and they stone people to death as a matter of routine, but that's carried out as official...
Also beheadings.
I just said that.
Yeah.
They carry this out as a matter of government policy, so therefore it doesn't constitute human rights violations because they're just public about it. So he said, today it is America that stands strong and united with our allies while Russia is isolated with its economy in tatters.
And
Now-
smiled about it.
Yeah, and
That
Russia,
was shivering.
meanwhile, is with the BRICS. Russia is trading with Brazil. I don't know if you remember when they first imposed these sanctions on Russia and Argentina announced what they were going to be trading with Russia, and it really made your mouth water because Argentina is an exporter of, you know, the best food imaginable. So they were shipping prime beef, olive oil, bread, so on, and I think at one point the Argentines were saying they were even going to send chefs over
Yeah.
to Russia because their beef is such high quality that they want people to cook it the right way, right? So here's Obama railing about how Russia is isolated when they have befriended all of these nations, or the relationship between Putin and al-Sisi in Egypt. I mean, it just goes on, and that the United States has these wonderful allies. So the thing was completely delusional, but also wildly dangerous, and makes clear why it is that we are on the precipice to thermonuclear war with Russia, because our head of state is clinically insane. Now, the reality on this, the economy, we'll just start with that, and the people who were at our Wall Street rally know some of this, or who've been listening to the webcast. In the fourth quarter of last year, the major banks laid off 50,000 people. They posted their biggest losses in 8 decades. That's the Great Depression. Bank of America laid off 20,000 bankers. Citibank laid off 10,000. Chase laid off 10,000. Okay, this is the Great Recovery. Apparently, so far this year, every single week, we have had 300,000 new unemployment claims. So every week of this year, we've had 300,000 new people filing for unemployment.
Every week?
Every week. Every week. This is the Great Recovery.
Oh.
Then they just had the League of, I think it's the League of Municipalities convention, where most cities are reporting that they have an increase of 7% requests for emergency food over last year, and increases of 20 to 30% for housing. The mayor of Seattle just went to the Seattle City Council saying we need 3 more tent cities. We already have 6, but we can't house, we have no housing for the people who are homeless, so we need 3 more tent cities.
They can't pay for rent.
Right, so this is what Obama is saying about how our wonderful economy, while other nations are in tatters, it could not be, it is a bald-faced lie. Now what's happening is we are on the brink of a total blowout of the system. And if Glass-Steagall is not reinstated as a first step, which remember not only bankrupts the criminal blood-sucking speculators, but what Glass-Steagall does is it puts a firewall of protection up around the normal commercial banks. So if you want to keep any semblance of functioning while this giant monster of a bubble collapses, you need your commercial banks to be able to function, because you want people to not lose their life savings. You want their mortgages to be regulated. You want a means for credit to go into the municipalities, because we don't want to lose all of our police officers, all of our teachers, all of our firefighters, all of the things that depend on this. So in effect, you need a bailout of the cities and states so that people can remain calm and know that they're not going to be wiped out while this thing crashes. So there's a big fight over Glass-Steagall, as people know. And as people may know, Wall Street spent $110 million on the Congress. I don't know why they call it lobbying the Congress. I would call it purchasing the Congress.
Yeah, and they're going to put Sheldon Silver in jail. Look what they're doing.
Yeah, and to do what? To get a bailout, because, and I don't know if people have heard the joke about the guy who goes to rob a bank and he puts a gun to his head and he says, "Give me all your money or I'll shoot, and you're next." But this is like the U.S. sanction policy on Russia, because we got this deal with the Saudis to lower the price of petroleum. Well, what does that do? Well, we have this big shale oil bubble, we have this big natural gas bubble, we've blown out, Warren Buffett has blown out the rail system, moving all this natural gas and fracking stuff around. So here we are forcing the price of oil down, and we are bankrupting Texas, North Dakota. The two main areas where the new unemployment claims are coming from is banking and the energy sector. Isn't that a riot? So it really, anyways, so it's just a free fall. Then what you have in Europe is a week ago, the Swiss pulled the Swiss franc out of the euro. And that, we can't get the figures because derivatives are all not regulated, but we know that various hedge funds lost tens of millions of dollars by the Swiss franc decoupling and making all of their bets go off. And then what happened on Thursday, sure enough, the European Central Bank announced more quantitative easing. So it's a total of $1.1 trillion at $70 billion a month to pump into this euro. Now, everyone here can reflect on how phenomenally—
Did you say billion?
Yeah, 70 billion a month. 70 billion a month. All the quantitative easing we had here, and it led to 50,000 bankers losing their jobs and 300,000 people getting laid off a week and a total collapse of the economy. And they're going to try the same thing in Europe, which will escalate the collapse. And then tomorrow are the Greek elections. And the Syriza party is carrying a big margin of the vote. That is, with another party, they could become the dominant party in Greece. And what they have been talking about doing is just judoing the agreements with the Troika and having Greece leave the euro. So if that occurs, like any good pyramid scheme, you pull one block out and the whole thing collapses. So this is all coming in the short term. This is why Mr. LaRouche is saying that the driver of thermonuclear war is the Wall Street, because they are crashing. They are going into free fall, and the only thing that they could hope to do is come up with a source of more wealth, bluster and bully and think that they're going to bluff Russia, back the Russians into a corner. Now, that worked really well when Napoleon tried it, and it worked great when Hitler tried it. In other words, the Russians, that is not in their history. That is not going to happen. So we are heading for thermonuclear war. Now, before I go through that, I also just want to say that the Chinese, as I said in the beginning, China made an offer to the United States, and it's in our, in this pamphlet, actually, where inside the front cover, there's this wonderful quote from Xi Jinping, where he says the Pacific Ocean is broad enough to accommodate the development of both China and the United States, and for our two countries to work together to contribute to security in Asia. We welcome the active participation of the United States and other relevant countries so that together we can promote and share prosperity and peace in Asia Pacific. So a very explicit invitation to the United States to join this. The Chinese, and they made it clear in the China People's Daily, that they view Obama's State of the Union as his response to that invitation. And his response to that invitation was basically F you.
Yeah.
Forget it. And he doesn't even talk in terms of the United States. I mean, he's basically like, I have a right to dictate. We are not going to let the Chinese people, even though there's 1.2 billion of them or 1.4 billion of them, we are not going to let them determine policies in China or anywhere else.
And
right?
Biden was glowing the whole time he
Yeah.
was speaking.
No, that was clearly all staged. So the other thing now I just want to focus on is this danger of nuclear war, because I think that people tend to block on it because it's a very unpleasant thing to think about. I mean, it's hard to get your mind around because a nuclear war is not like another kind of war. That is, you don't even have to be hit. If you have major nuclear explosions in any part of the planet, what you're talking about are environmental factors that change the entire climate. People have heard the phrase nuclear winter, where you get large amounts of ash and carbon going high into the atmosphere. So if you're not fortunate enough to die in the initial explosion, you'll just starve to death because the temperatures of the whole planet will go down to ice age levels because the sun can't get through. So food won't grow. In other words, this is not a winnable proposition, and that's why after Japan surrendered, after we nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was completely unnecessary. MacArthur had done a successful naval blockade, and the Japanese had reached out to the
Vatican signing.
That's right. They were working out the terms of surrender, and we went ahead and did it because of Bertrand Russell's policy of a one-world government, that the way you were to run the world was by terror. So we wanted to use the nuclear bombs so that we would have a way of running a dictatorship through fear. And General Douglas MacArthur said, after that, he said, we have reached the point where war can no longer be used to resolve disputes. Because when you reach the level of nuclear war, it means annihilation of the species. So we can't go there. Now, so what's happening? Well, people know that we're using this situation in Ukraine, which was completely created by Wall Street, where you have this Victoria Nuland, which married to Bill Kagan from the Cheney era, and she gets a few $1 billion, George Soros and others, and they bankroll a bunch of Nazis, and they overthrow the government. Now, interestingly, in this so-called coup, whatever, the democratic uprising, as Obama calls it, in Ukraine, you know where people were coming in from to help with the fighting? Chechnya.
Oh.
So you have the Chechen terrorists joining with the Nazis in Ukraine, just like you have, and the head of ISIS is a Chechen,
Yes,
okay?
yes.
And you have ISIS coordinating with Boko Haram in Nigeria. So what you see is the network that is detonating the world is not a huge network. They're recruiting, but the core of it is not, it's Saudi, British, and it would be relatively easy to crush it if there were a decision to do so. But at any rate, so we participated in this, and what has happened in the last week in Ukraine is absolutely hideous. In Donetsk, I think 226 or more now probably people have been killed. There was just this hideous bombing of a civilian bus stop during rush hour that killed 16 people. And Putin yesterday made a very short statement on this. I'm trying to find it here. Yeah. So what he had to say is, he said, we are witnessing a dramatic deterioration of the situation in southeastern Ukraine, in Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic. In this connection, I would like to inform you again that a week ago on Thursday, I sent a letter to the President of Ukraine, a written proposal to withdraw heavy weapons and artillery and multiple rocket launchers to such a distance from which it would be impossible to fire at populated areas. Unfortunately, we received no clear answer to our proposal. In fact, we also saw the reverse action, namely the Kiev government has given an official order to launch large-scale combat operations along almost the entire perimeter of contact between the opposing sides. The result, dozens of dead and wounded, and not only among servicemen on both sides, but even more tragically, there's been a loss of life among the civilian population, including children, the elderly, and women. The artillery, multiple rocket launchers, and aircraft are firing indiscriminately directly at densely populated areas. All of this is happening to the accompaniment of propaganda slogans about the quest for peace and the search for those responsible. The responsibility is borne by those who issue such criminal orders. The people who do this should know that there is no other way but to solve such conflicts but through peace negotiations and political means. We often hear, including from today's official at Kiev, that this is their preferred method of addressing issues, but the reality is quite different. I hope that common sense will eventually triumph. I would like to call for a moment of silence to honor the victims, including those who died at a bus stop in Donetsk. Now, Obama, it was announced 2 days ago that the U.S. is sending troops to Ukraine.
What?
To train not the Ukrainian army, but the Ukrainian National Guard, which is where you have the bulk of the Nazis, the Svoboda Party, the people. Some of the uniforms still have swastikas on them.
How come the Jews are so quiet about this stuff?
Well, there's some stuff
in
breaking.
In this country, usually, you know, I'm at the JCC, they look at me like, duh. I said, well, how come? I thought it was bad that the Christian church and the Pope did not call for that Carmelite nun to come and talk to her, to him. The Christians like, wow, it's a Christian. That never went on when Assad was there.
Right. No.
And now we have this now with the Jews, and the rabbis were telling them, get out now because the Russians are going, and you get out and leave.
No, we just actually yesterday we met a couple in the field from Kiev who were too terrified to leave their information, but they contributed, and they said what is it with Victoria Newland? She's part Jewish. She was over there handing out cookies and
part Jewish.
I know, so is Soros.
It's part Jewish.
Yeah, I know.
They're all Jewish.
Right. Anyway.
Jewish.
Right. But here she was handing
they're all
out.
Jews. They're Nazi Jews.
They made
the Nazis.
Right. They are. They are Nazi Jews. They said this woman was handing out cupcakes and Twinkies to Nazis 4 miles away from a place where 300,000 Jews were killed. Right, and so it's not that people don't know. Now, this has begun to get so alarming that a number of things have come out. First of all, this article, which was in The Nation last month, which I think is just really useful for people to take a look at. It's written by a guy named Theodore Postal, and he apparently worked in the Reagan administration, and his job was to analyze Moscow's anti-ballistic missile defense as the chief of naval operations in the early 80s. So he's a guy who knows nuclear weapons. Now, I think he's now at MIT. So the title of his article is How the Obama Administration Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, for anyone who ever saw the movie Dr. Strangelove. And he says that when Obama was campaigning for president in 2008, he famously pledged to place nuclear disarmament at the center of his national security strategy, blah, blah, that Obama's going to reduce nuclear weapons. But what actually has occurred is that we are upgrading the nuclear weapons arsenal, and a recent federal study estimated the cost of this enterprise at $1 trillion. That is what we have spent. Now, what he says, and I think it's very important to get in mind how people think about this. Why does Linda LaRouche say if we had nuclear war, it'd be over in 90 minutes, for example? He says sophisticated Russian analysts, especially those who understand the technical aspects of nuclear weapons, see the modernization drive as a disturbing indication that the U.S. military believes a nuclear war against Russia can be fought and won. And I will tell you something apparently that Snowden just revealed, is that what you have among these wacky, this is why we have to have a productive economy, because people don't know how the real world works. Anyway, these wacky computer hackers, cyber warfare, or whatever experts, is they believe that they now have the ability to completely scramble and jam all of the Russian and Chinese signals so that we could prevent them by interfering with their communications. We could prevent them from being able to do a second strike. That's right. So therefore, we could win a nuclear war. And that is what you have. That is so dangerous that anyone thinks that there's such a thing as winning this. So he goes on to say that it was the Soviets' obsessive focus on improving their strike capacity that led Ronald Reagan to the same conclusion about his counterparts. Why did Reagan want the SDI? Because he was looking at the Soviet Union in the 80s and seeing that it looked like the Soviets thought that they could win a nuclear war. And he said, and I was analyzing Moscow's anti-ballistic missiles in the 80s when I was, such an advisor. So he said, these analysts on the Russian side will ask themselves, why are the Americans putting so much national treasure into systems that could not realistically be expected to work? Do U.S. military and political leaders actually believe that the upgraded systems could serve a useful military purpose? If so, could such ill-informed beliefs lead to a cascade of events that result in a nuclear catastrophe? And he writes, the troubling answer to both questions is yes. This leads to another unsettling conclusion. The modernization program is a reckless policy that directly undermines our safety and national security. While no rational human being would ever launch nuclear missiles with forethought, the history of the Cold War is filled with examples of unforeseen events that could have led to their use in a crisis. Now, people may have heard Jeff Steinberg talking about the Cuban Missiles crisis, where what was very different was that you had Kennedy in the White House, and that Kennedy had an active channel to Nikita Khrushchev. So that while all these other things were going on, both Kennedy and Khrushchev, who was not a wonderful, humanist or something, nonetheless, both of them actually recognized what would be the consequences of nuclear war, so that you had a means to create a solution. Who is in the White House today?
Oh.
And so what would be our basis for avoiding a catastrophe, or even something based on a quote-unquote accident or miscalculation? And he said the first point to consider when evaluating the consequences of the U.S. nuclear weapons policy is that Russia has good reason to be worried. With a fully modernized arsenal, the formerly less capable nuclear warheads will be able to destroy Russian silo-based ICBMs with confidence. This would free up higher-yield nuclear warheads for other warfighting tasks, enabling the U.S. military to inflict greater damage on Russian command centers, fixed military facilities, and civilian industrial infrastructure. Russian analysts have already assessed this increasing nuclear threat, and Russian leaders have responded by delegating launch authority to lower levels of military leadership. This is why LaRouche said that Russia now has no choice. That is, if they think that we are going to launch, you may have heard his formulation from the Wall Street, that the U.S. will be obliterated before our missiles hit over there. That is, they will have to do a preemptive launch. They cannot wait for our missiles to land. And what they are doing already in response to our insanity is they are putting their ballistic missile systems on trains, so they're able to move them all around their territory so that we would not be able to obliterate them. Yeah.
My question is, what is the purpose besides oil and these things that don't promise anything for the human evolution and civilization? You know what? When these people sit behind their desks, do they see the effect that their decision can make on multi-billion people in the world? Do they have a heart, or are they robots?
Well, they are robots.
Right? They are robots.
No, if you think about the story of Zeus, and there's also Zeus versus Prometheus, but let's just take Zeus. I don't know if you ever had the misfortune to listen to an opera by Wagner. It's really a terrible thing. But anyways, there's the myth is called, this long opera called The Twilight of the Gods. And Zeus is of such a mindset that if Zeus cannot run the world his way, that he will destroy it. And he doesn't even care.
Selfish.
Yeah, and so obsessed that you don't even mind that you might destroy yourself.
I get that feeling from Obama.
Well, Obama is like that.
I thought, how can he, with what has happened in the past year, stand there as if everything's fine? I thought, where is the man?
Right.
There's no
but I think in his case, he actually is really dumb.
Crazy?
I mean, I think he doesn't even, he is a programmable, if you read about what a malignant narcissist is, all he can think about is his ego, how he looks, and if a crisis makes him look better, which makes him a very perfect tool for the interests who would do this. And also don't forget the view that's been expressly stated by the Queen of England, Prince Philip, Al Gore, Obama science advisor, George Bush Sr. The world's overpopulated anyway, and really we should only have 1 billion people. So this is a good way to get rid of them. Anyway, so I think that you get the idea. There's more. I mean, there's really terrifying reports in here, and people may remember some of this. He says, and he makes the point that the danger of being really confident in how smart your weapons are and how accurate you can be is you say we don't have to be as careful because we know that our weapons are brilliant and accurate. So then people get sloppy, and you remember all this stuff on all these Air Force people who were cheating on their performance tests and so on. You might remember, I had a vague memory of this. In August 30th, 2007, 6 nuclear-armed cruise missiles were loaded onto a B-52 bomber without the knowledge of either the ground crew or the pilots, and flown across the United States.
These are professional people, right?
Yeah, now imagine if they put 6 nuclear-armed cruise missiles were put on a plane and flown across the United States, and the pilots and the ground crew who loaded them didn't know what they were carrying.
Wow.
And that happened in 2007. Right, so and then he describes another thing which is totally terrifying to me, where they accidentally programmed a practice tape into the command center which told them that the Soviets had launched an attack. And so we went into high alert thinking that the attack was on, and it was only a practice tape. And thank God they managed to figure it out before we all got incinerated. So he just makes the point, our risk is now so great, even if you didn't have lunatics in power who think they can win a nuclear war, you have such incompetence that it's just, anyways. So he says the US modernization program is producing nuclear forces that will severely complicate the chances of backing away from a disaster if a crisis were to occur. Anyone who looks at history knows that such crises will occur and that they result from unpredictable and unforeseen events. This basic truth should be the basis for a sober reevaluation of the modernization program. And then the last thing, which came out this past week, finally, Market Watch. That's not secret press, mainstream press. Editorial. Perhaps you missed it. We're at war with Russia. And the guy says, Secretary of State John Kerry has accused Russia of providing heavy arms to Ukrainian separatists, but has offered no proof. And then he makes the point, the sorts of weaponry that NATO and the US have charged Russia with providing are virtually impossible to conceal from the air. Snapping high-resolution photos of such war machinery. If anyone's gotten a parking ticket from a camera lately, you know they can get your license plate, right? So he says if we're moving armored vehicle carriers and tanks and rocket launchers, and you have an invasion of Ukraine, you'd think they'd have photographs all over the press. Well, isn't that odd? We haven't seen one photograph of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, it's one thing, we lied about Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction, everyone remembers that.
Oh, yeah.
Lying about Russia is a different matter, of orders of magnitude more dangerous.
They actually had a Russian blogger who took pictures of little toy tanks and stuff, and lined them up, took a picture of it and said, here's the real proof the Russians are invading the Ukraine.
No, they
it
pick
went
up pictures
all over the
from
place.
movies.
Right.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. And then he also makes the point, people may remember this totally insane resolution 758 that they passed on December 4th, which accused Russia of having invaded Ukraine and denounced Putin. I mean, this is like the whole entire Congress voting for war with Russia, and I forget now how many.
Congress issued this?
The U.S. Congress, yes, passed this back in December, and I forget, it was like 11 people voted against it. Only
I'd like to
11.
know who they are.
The Congress is bought and paid for by Wall Street, and Wall Street is the one entity on this planet, along with the City of London, that wants this war, because that's how they think they can maintain the reorganization of their power while they have absolutely nothing and less than nothing. That's all it is.
The interesting thing is the 11 congressmen who voted against this are all congressmen that we have worked with. Most of them are co-sponsors on the 28 pages, for example. So, you know,
What about Elizabeth
that's our
Warren?
effect. I don't remember what
I
she
don't
did
know, but
on
she was
that.
standing there
No,
clapping.
the entire New Jersey delegation voted for war with Russia. I'm sorry to say. But at any rate,
And,
I'm going
Iran,
to
too.
close because I think by your reaction it's becoming clear where we are in
I really
history and
appreciate
what
it, Joanne.
the danger
You just told
is.
us.
And what Lynn Speed is going to present is why our work in Manhattan, and Manhattan, crucially, what Marcel said about DC is exactly the case. And if you saw the State of the Union address, you know why we're not going to win the fight in DC, because these idiots will jump up and cheer Adolf Hitler announcing World War III. So we're not going to win the fight in DC, but we can win the fight for the nation from New York City. And that is the job of us and our organization here.